And in that theme of things that will be available moving forward, but not necessarily things we are directly measuring, we have Jessira Perovic here today from MLA. Jessira is the project manager for Meat Standards Australia R&D and Analytics. Jessira came to us via Wagga, where she studied a Bachelor of Animal Science and was originally based in Brisbane. She saw the light and decided to come to Armidale. She's been an active part of the Australian meat judging community. We won't hold that against her. And she's here today to talk about a cuts-based MSA sheep meat model. So give it up for Jessira.
All right, so I've got to put a little bit of a disclaimer out there straight away that I myself have only had this model for 3 weeks. So you guys are definitely right at the front of seeing this being the first look. And we do have a Pathways meeting, which is our research group on Monday. So this actual model that we're going to be talking about today will be going for its first level of endorsement there. So very, very new. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to break it into a couple of different sections. So I want to talk about the why. So what's the background? Why are we looking at an eating quality model? What can it possibly do for industry? We're going to talk about the what. So what are the main inputs that are going to go into the model? What's the data that the model's currently based on? And then we'll talk about the how and the rollout plan. So what we're actually doing on the ground at the moment and what the timeframes might be looking like. So starting with the why. So looking at our our MLA Consumer Insights team, we know that global sheep consumption over the last 25 years has increased by 50%. So we know that the global demand is also going to increase by about 2.5% over the next five years. So we know that we're looking at a global demand for sheep meat that is increasing. We also know that the price of lamb has almost tripled since 2009. So we were looking at prices around $6.70 per kilo. Now we're looking at, in 2019, $16, $17 a kilo, and we know for our loin cuts it's well and truly higher than that as well. And we also know that lamb has a bit of a competition. You know, it's 310% the price of chicken on the retail shelf, and we know that consumers are saying that it's a special occasion product. So I guess the context around this is that if we are asking consumers to buy and pay more product, we can't afford to let them down. We need to make sure that those values that they could potentially be getting on the retail shelf are non-existent. What we also know, and at the moment we're working with a lot of processors in this space as well, because we know the price of lamb is so high and we're trying to figure out whether or not there is still room to push it higher. But we know that consumers are willing to pay more, and so we have sensory results out of the US, China and Australia that all say the same thing. This is really similar to the beef chart as well. Consumers are very similar across different species. So we know that they want to pay half as much for a fail. We use our 3-star or our good every day as our baseline. They'll pay 50% more for your better than every day, and they'll pay 100% more for that top quality premium stuff that you're probably getting out of a high-end restaurant somewhere. But what we know about the MSA pathway itself, so at the moment we are a pathways-based system. So with I guess the pathways, so the lower stress handling, the non-mixing, the non-drafting, the non-shearing before slaughter, and also the introduction of stimulation, we have been able to reduce a tail in what we were saying was the shear force. So at about a 5 is where the thresholds start to kick over into something that's a little bit tougher. And with the MSA program in place, we have been able to reduce that tail. This chart is a little bit older, and I guess one of the main things that we're going to focus on in the next couple of slides, can anyone tell me what's the number one thing you currently paid for if you sell lamb to an abattoir? Weight, exactly. So when we look at weight from an eating quality perspective, what we see here is that there really isn't a relationship between weight and eating quality. But when we select on weight and we select singularly on weight, we know that we are starting to get those animals that are reduced in the intramuscular fat characteristics and obviously increased lean meat yield. So what we know, if we have a look at these two populations now, I'll put a disclaimer on this one as well because there can be other effects in amongst these populations. But what we've got here is the 2009 10 drop lambs run across the MSA model. We've got the 2017 drop lambs. And what you can see here is that there has been a bit of a shift in the average eating quality of these flocks. We can attribute that to weight, but look, there's a lot of other factors that would be involved in this as well. So there could be drought periods, there could be different sire types selected, there's lots of different other factors, but we can say that price signals can potentially have led to the decrease in eating quality over time. So what we're saying, I guess, is that even with the MSA system in place as it is, we are expecting that there are some lambs that are being processed that have the potential to have cuts that are failing the consumer's eating quality. But what we also know is that there's a very good group of producers out there, and we know that the genetic lamb trends are changing. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I'm certainly not an expert in this space, but there'll be a lot of other people in the room that can explain this better than me. But we are seeing, obviously, that bend in shear force coming back down, and we are seeing IMF in conjunction going up with it. So the current MSA model that we've got, obviously we do untrained consumer taste tests. So we have at this point tested over 100,000 consumers, and we like to find the relationship between consumer scores and traits influencing eating quality. So the best part, as Hamish mentioned before, is that we do have the resource flock. So we're a little bit of ahead probably of the beef because we have this direct link straight into the genetic traits. And obviously we're predicting a cut by cook outcome. So whilst the resource flock project is mainly testing the top side and loin, we have separately funded additional research into all the other cuts in the carcass as well. So we're not just predicting a couple of cuts, we want to predict as many as we possibly can, and across new and innovative cook methods as well. And as you can see here, this does look like a little bit like a child's drawing, I apologise, but what you can see here is that we've got all the different cuts. So we've got loins, rack, outside, knuckle, leg, rump, shoulder, top side. And what we know is that if we put in a line here that pretty much says that's the borderline between a failure, we do have a lot of product out there in this particular subset that's failing consumer expectations. So that's where we're saying that we need to be able to identify where they are and potentially make decisions around them, whether or not they need different cook methods or whether or not we need to improve the potential of the flock. At the same time, there is definite room for, I guess, tiering. So when I talk about good every day, better than every day, and the best of the best, there is room to start putting in branding strategies with the processing sector. So the what. So obviously, majority of the data that's behind the MSA model calculations at the moment has come from the resource flock. So just to put that into a little bit of perspective about some of the data that's in there, obviously we've got the Kirby and the Katanning flocks. We're looking at a hot standard carcass weight range of 13 to 40 kilos, so we do have a wide range in weight. We've got quite a wide range in fat as well, and lean meat yield is there as well. We do have an IMF range of about 3 to 10% with an average of about 5% as well. And what we've been able to do from there is pretty much construct our first look at an MSA model. So the main inputs that are going into this model is hot carcass weight, lean meat yield and intramuscular fat. The lean meat yield one is quite interesting because obviously we've got plants out there that have your dual energy X-ray machines. It's quite easy for them to get a lean meat yield, but we do need to design this system for every kind of processor out there. So we are working at the moment on a few different equations that use different carcass attributes to try and also get that lean meat yield, I guess, in the processors that don't have the technology as high tech as what the other guys do. And we then have outputs. So we have grill and roast in this first model. We're calling this the 9 cut by cook model. We'll have implications for the knuckle, loin, outside, rump, top side, and then roasts on the knuckle, leg, rack and shoulder. And as we work through that, again, we'll be looking at doing your good every day, better than every day, and the best of the best, as well as trying to identify those failures. And I guess just to put that into perspective around what that average resource flock lamb looked like. So what I've done here is I've grabbed a 24 kilo carcass lamb. We're looking at a lean meat yield at the moment of 55, and we've got an IMF scale of 2, 3, 4 and 5%. So that's at grading. So what we've got here on our red line is the mark where a loin turns into a better than everyday product. So realistically, it's one of the best cuts in the body. It's probably not too much to ask for it to try and be a 4-star or a better than everyday product. So what this shows is that if you've got a 24 kilo lamb with a lean meat yield of 55%, you're looking at about 4% IMF for it to be a 4-star product or a better than everyday product. If we step out the lean meat yield, if you jump back to a 50 lean meat yield, you can now see that we probably cross over to about 3.8% IMF. If we jump to a 60, if we're getting into the higher lean meat yield animals, you're more looking now at about a 4.2%. And if we step into that 65 again, you're now looking at about a 4.5 to a 5% IMF. So it just shows that as you start shifting lean meat yield, you do need to focus a little bit more on IMF. It is one of the biggest drivers in the model. It also goes to show that if you don't use electrical stimulation, you're in a little bit of trouble. So from a carcass perspective here, you're looking at about an IMF of about 7 or 8%, which is actually quite high, to try and get that into a 4-star category as well. And when we have a look at that, put that in perspective, I guess, what we've got here is we've got a 2, we've got a 4, and we've got a 6% animal. So when you look at our lovely master lamb cameras here, the difference is not huge, but in saying that, it's not that easy to get it in there at the same time. Now the how. So obviously we've got a fairly big process in front of us, but the number one thing that we're limited by at the moment is that we need a measure of IMF. And we are working with a lot of different devices at the moment to try and get this figure, and it is taking a little bit of time, but we're hoping as soon as we've got one, we're going to be ready to go. So obviously we've got the meat eating quality probe that's online at a processor down south. We've got the ASD NIR probe that's taking images of the top side. The top side and the loin are quite highly linked with IMF, so looking at getting a IMF percentage with that. We've got the Soma Optics camera out of Japan, and then we've got the master lamb, which was the images you just saw before, but we do have other ones along the line as well. But this is our main limiter. Without this, that's where the model gets pulled up a little bit. But in saying that, we are working with the processor at the moment, just trying to figure out how some of these will go with placement at chain speed. Obviously we've got a few steps with endorsement. So as I mentioned, we do have a meeting Monday, which will be the first level to say, yes, let's go ahead with the MSA model. So there's a lot of different language around it as well. So IMF itself as a language with regards to eating quality doesn't exist. So that has to go to language and standards committees, and it needs endorsement. So there is a bit of a process that we have to go through probably in the next 6 months to get it off the ground. So that's the lovely politics side of things. And then we've got a very big piece at the moment. So we are working at the moment just with processors on the East Coast, but we are looking at going to the West Coast as well. I guess we're spending a lot of time in the boning rooms, in the plant systems. We've got some pretty good accuracy in our cut surface cameras, but at the same time, fitting them into an abattoir system is not easy. A lot of them lose carcass identification about 20 metres back as they come out of the chillers, and then by the time that you've got the loin in your hands, the hindquarter and forequarter is God only knows where. So we are working out the logistics at the moment, how they fit within the processing sector, and obviously there's a lot of technology that needs to be lifted in that sector as well to bring it in. So again, how does it fit? Where does it fit? What are the logistics? And what's the feasibility? And then I guess the next phase for us is that we're looking at benchmarking the MSA flock. So we have over 4 million lambs come through the system on an annual basis, and what we're trying to do is, whilst we've got the resource flock data, we are looking at what the commercial lamb out there looks like as well. So by any means, if anyone has any genomic or genetically tested animals out there that you've got kills coming up, let us know, because we are looking for that as well as everything else, but we're just trying to get a bit of a picture about what the Australian flock actually looks like from an eating quality perspective. And then obviously a big task for us at MSA is building all the systems around this. So obviously there's still research that needs to happen in some core areas. There's a lot of new processing interventions. There's obviously the MyMSA systems development, so we're looking at the feedback portal. Peter, I think it was someone spoke earlier about the data lake. What we're trying to do is make sure that if we do get a feedback system, that we can link to things like animal health, the genetic data and everything like that, so just in one spot. Obviously, there'll be a bit of work with the processing sector, the branding sector, setting up whether or not they're going to put in high-tiered brands or whether there's going to be segregation opportunities. There's future cut by cook development. So I know we're working with UNE. They're doing some low and slow smoked shoulders at the moment. They are looking for consumers, I'm sure, to recruit. So if anyone wants to be a consumer on that one, I highly recommend it. And we also obviously need to look at the benchmarking and see what linkages we can get into breeding objectives, and obviously ultimately the feedback back to the producer is the main thing here. And I think that's me, done. That's it.
Thanks, Jessira.
No worries.
Plenty of time to go, which is good. Okay, and some good questions. So we'll start punching our way through these. So we'll start with the top one, if that's okay with you.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, because it's got 2 thumbs up and everyone else has 1 or 0. Okay, so as we break the negative correlations between yield and intramuscular fat, how will that be adjusted in the MSA model, which relies on phenotypes?
I'm not quite sure the best way to answer this, but basically in the MSA model, they have weightings for all of those different attributes at the moment. And as we start to debunk, I guess, those negative correlations, we've got different lambs coming through. We will continue to sensory test these animals. So we are going to continue to change, I guess, the way in which the MSA model will work. But ultimately, it has a correlation with IMF, and it has a correlation with lean meat yield, and it has a correlation with hot standard carcass weight that makes an adjustment in the model. I'm hoping that's the best way. I don't know if
I think that's basically it, isn't it? It's just using the most relevant information to update said model and the nuts and bolts behind it.
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. Well done. All right, what are the attitudes of processors towards the MSA model, and do they see the benefit for their businesses?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. It's a bit mixed, honestly. We do have some processors that are incredibly keen; they want it yesterday. We have some processors that are struggling with the, are we going to ask producers to pay $50 a kilo for a loan? So they can definitely see the benefits and I guess the cons as well. We have been in touch with, obviously, the 2 major retailers. Very, very keen to get this on board, and that's obviously driving a little bit of the passion behind the processes at the moment. But on a whole, it is very positive so far.
Excellent. Next question. This is, I guess, more an MSA in terms of the glycogen story, but is there an opinion on how long post-shearing lambs should be sent to for slaughter to eliminate that stress on meat eating quality?
Yeah, there is, and it's in our standards. And I don't want to say the wrong figure.
Yep. So we'll just say there is a...
2 weeks. It's 2 weeks.
2 weeks?
Off shears.
Off shears.
As a minimum, yeah. But it is a standard. It's in the recommendations and requirements for the MSA supply pathway.
So we're not talking an opinion, we're talking about facts.
An actual fact, yeah.
Correct. Good. Okay, what proportion of plants are currently using the DEXA system? And of those proportion, actually I'll reword this question if that's okay with you. What number of plants are using DEXA, and what proportion of the lambs do they process?
Great question. Let me think. 1, 2, 3. So I know of at least 4 processors that are very large processors of lambs across the country, and I know of another one that's just signing a contract for a new one. So I can probably say that the biggest players have them, for sure. They've all got DEXAs, and I mean MLA is working with the MDC program to make sure that we can try and get some in more plants, but there are a lot of plants out there that still just don't have the capacity for it.
Excellent. Okay, next question. In terms of the model again, how are we going to account for variation in the accuracy of the lean meat yield data?
Yeah, this one's a really good question. We have a series of equations that we can use to calculate lean meat yield. Obviously, with those equations, the accuracy goes from good to excellent. What we're trying to figure out at the moment is, do we have one simple way for calculating lean meat yield? So even if they have a DEXA system, do we use other values to calculate lean meat yield? There's a lot of questions behind it, but what we'll be going for is what's easily implemented by everybody and what's the highest accuracy that we can potentially get.
Okay, so is there any more questions, guys? We've got a little bit of time. If Yep, Andrew.
With your indulgence, Luke, it's more of a comment. And I just wanted to say that having seen this excellent stuff, Jess, that it is actually highly complementary with the breeding objectives that we have and indexes that we have for terminal sire sheep with regard to improving eating quality and lean meat yield. It's kind of the same sort of principles that are used to develop those.
Thank you. That's the best kind of question right there.
That's it. Who doesn't like a tyre pumper? Okay, any other questions, guys? So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll break for afternoon tea now. Our guests south of the Murray will be going into a session of their own straight after afternoon tea. So we have here half an hour and we'll be back here to talk taking ownership for investment where it matters for you. Thanks everyone for your effort so far. Let's keep going.